Welcome to Construction One-on-One with Ravi Bhatia. We've got a very special guest today, Zachary Ames, Director of Technology for Gramercy Group, and also co-founder of ConTech Alliance. As we know, construction is become a high-tech business. But before we get to that, we want to know about you. We want to know what makes you tick, and how is your journey from being a civil engineer and working your way through, and now being a director of technology for a major construction company in New York.
Not the straightest of paths. Definitely very interested in construction growing up. Always loved building stuff, going to my backyard, doing all that. Went to college, went down the civil engineering route, but really started to find a lot of interest in the construction industry through my different internships. I worked in Israel on the Ben Gurion International Airport for a construction company there. Then I did field testing and driving around a truck and doing rebar inspections and doing soil impact testing and doing concrete testing. Got to see a lot of different types of building work there. Then I went and worked with Hewitt and Walsh, so two really big contractors on really big infrastructure projects. And I essentially started to realize that there was a pretty substantial gap in the technology that we utilize in the industry. Started to commit a lot of my time and energy within these projects to implement new systems, do research, try to talk to people higher up in the company about things that we could do to improve it, and eventually moved over to Gramercy. Kept doing that enough to the point where they gave me a little bit more leeway to implement new systems, and eventually made the full-time switch to technology manager rather than project manager.
It's an incredibly, I'd say, rapid climb, and that's the world we live in, that you embrace technology, and there are people out there willing to give you an opportunity because you are passionate about it. In your view, what is innovation in construction? What does that look like, or what is it supposed to look like?
Innovation in construction is an uphill battle. First and foremost, it's supposed to look like the ability to help projects in a measurable way be completed faster and safer and cheaper. And if you can't do any of that stuff, then it doesn't matter. Like, the technology has no impact if you aren't helping a project be one of those three things, or essentially all three of them. So it's very important that we measure the outcomes of these systems, that we don't just put them in place with kind of no feedback loop. Every time we go and implement a system, I create a dashboard and I try to pull some information back into the dashboard that will allow us to track the usage of it or the outcomes of it during its implementation.
As a civil engineer, you understand that construction is a risky business. How do you see innovation helping contractors, first of all, de-risk projects, but on a more macro scale, how does it help owners de-risk projects and the industry de-risk projects?
The ability to have a lot more centralized information that you can track. So insurance is a risk, right? So being able to pull all of your insurance documents into one place and track them, that's one mechanism by which you're reducing risk. Certain softwares that allow you to track costs better, those will allow you to reduce your risk because you are projecting your costs on a monthly basis. You're trying to get ahead of potential shortcomings of the project. There are safety softwares which will allow you to assign observations and to stay much more on top of your safety systems and your certifications for your workers. Like, all of those systems will allow you to reduce risk. Also, on the supply chain side, you can have a lot of the lead times come into more of a centralized database that could be shared with the owner. Right now, you have these silos of SaaS products that exist for the owner, the general contractor, and the subcontractor, and the material vendors. Like, being able to bring those systems, that I spoke about before, across them in a way that they feel comfortable sharing information and they don't feel like they're exposing themselves, but at the same time allowing them to communicate with each other. I think that really is where this will start to go in the future, because they could all find value in those systems on different pieces of the chain.
How important is it to include the supply chain in your innovation efforts, the integration with the supply chain, especially today? How do you view that?
I think it's becoming more relevant to more companies as they have these very difficult conversations about lead times and about LDs and all of the different owners that are saying that these are not necessarily going to be excluded from the contract and that you can't necessarily put it on your vendors if there are delays to the contract. And I know that's been just massively frustrating for a lot of the civil jobs that I've seen like so far in my career. And I think there do needs to be systems to help create of a streamlined supply chain. And I think the material vendors need to be a part of that. I think every aspect of the industry needs to be a part of that. I think the utilization of AI and certain bots can help us aggregate that information. All of that information exists in like completely different places. Like some of the information's on a ticket that goes and gets handed to a foreman. Some of the information's on an invoice that goes in an ERP system. Some of the information is in someone's head. Some of it's in a spreadsheet that a PM has. Like that is really fragmented. I think the use of AI, bots, systems, automated calling will allow it to aggregate a lot more of that. And there's a couple cool companies that are working in that space right now.
There's still so much more work to be done, and we're at an early stage, relatively speaking, in construction. Where do you see the opportunities for innovation? Where do we go from here?
There's a lot of fragmentation in the industry. It's very not consolidated. There are tons and tons of small mom and pop companies, and essentially with that, you get just a fragmentation of processes. So where I see it going in the future is that these systems will allow for companies to essentially standardize processes like alongside each other. So it might not be the same company, but if they're all using a software that tracks T&M tickets, then there starts to be more of an industry standard for T&M tickets naturally. And that has happened with pay requisitions, that happened with T&M tickets, that happens with safety reporting, that happens with, BIM and the different styles and the different industry standards for that. ConTech Alliance, we also want to start to introduce some of these industry standards. We're thinking more in terms of education, certification, maybe for some robotic systems with the labor force out here in the city. But I do think a lot of those technology platforms will allow us to standardize in the future.
I'm so glad you mentioned ConTech Alliance, because what you're doing is creating an ecosystem for advancing the entire industry. What we love about construction, it's really the fragmentation. It's a messy industry. It's an old line industry. It's an industry that's ripe for change, and therein is the opportunity. That's what makes it really exciting, right? Do you sometimes think that you're drinking from a fire hydrant?
What I think is so interesting is that it is a brick and mortar industry. You get to work in robotics, you get to work in drones, you get to work in pure software, you get to work in, integrated software, you get to work with APIs. Like there are just so many different opportunities on the hardware space and the robotic space. SaaS programs, they allow us to organize information better, but ultimately they just allow people to be less frustrated in their job, whether they're in procurement or whether they're in the field as a superintendent. Like the software is there so that they don't have to text everything or phone call constantly, and it allows them to organize information. The hardware component is really exciting, and I think there's pretty much unlimited opportunities in terms of like the material space, the different materials that we can utilize in the future, and the hardware space, specifically in robotics.
There's never a dull moment. Often when I speak with people about innovation, they remind me that, don't forget, this is a people business. So there's always going to be a role for people. And I remind people also that while the advent of AI is a positive thing, some people see it as a specter of AI. But what's your view on that?
I find that in construction, we are just constantly socializing, and that's because there's 40 or 50 companies associated with like a medium-sized job. Then you talk about the vendors, and it's just like there's so many people rowing in the same direction to get this project done. In terms of automation, I do believe obviously there'll be some jobs that will be augmented, but ultimately there's so much work and so much improvement and so much housing and infrastructure.
What role do emerging technology companies have?
Startups and the continuation of new startups is really what drives the economy forward in general. And what they're allowing projects to do is to have a new perspective on their business management processes. Even if they don't end up implementing that solution, at least they're starting to think, oh, why don't we scan invoices automatically when they come in? If they had a demo with a company that does that, they're always coming with new ideas, because the process for a startup is somebody has an idea and they go and interview 100 people. So they become more knowledgeable about that idea than anybody else. And that's why it makes more sense for them to build the product than for me to build the product. I build some products in-house, and that's through the Microsoft suite. There are some products that I shouldn't be spending time building because somebody else has learned a lot about a process, become an absolute expert on it, and then executed on it and put it into the market. So in terms of what those companies do for the industry is that they're finding all of these pain points, assessing them very deeply, and then putting software into the market that's economical, which means it makes sense for them and for the contractor to both economically survive. And they essentially allow us to move our processes forward, which should allow us to build faster, cheaper, and safer.
What excites you about your career, and where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Very excited about the use of AI in the industry. I think it will help quite a lot of people. I personally use it very frequently. I think that will continue to accelerate with the use of the bots and their ability to get us a lot of information. What I heard recently was that a lot of the information maybe that the bots will help us get in terms of data and touch points, like 90% of it will be information that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So it's not really going to replace what's happening right now. It's going to get us a lot more information that we might not have been seeking out previously because we didn't have a mechanism to get it. For me personally, just continuing to drive the industry forward with the ConTech Alliance and bringing a lot more awareness and investment to the space, because it is under invested in both capital and in both labor. Labor in terms of a lot of younger people don't necessarily think of going into construction. I think the usage of technology as a sales tool to go up to younger engineers coming out of college and to be a lot more competitive when they see, certain aerospace companies or certain automotive companies and, very flashy kinds of industries. I want them to think of construction like that. So continuing to bring investment and some of those people into the industry I'd be happy with that in 5 years.
That's such a great way to close this out. The construction is indeed a high-tech industry. That's not a pitch, that is the reality. And our industry is fortunate to have people like you leading the way.